Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about how your lack of consciousness might be killing your company. And joining us to contribute to the conversation is Tom Willis. Welcome, Tom.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk.
Yeah, I'm glad you could be here. Could you share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, happy to. Grew up in Michigan, went to the University of Michigan for an engineering degree and worked for some big companies, Intel and then PricewaterhouseCoopers. I didn't like one of them and I got fired from the other. So I found myself really struggling with what I want to do with my life. Long story short, I started teaching actually in Detroit in the inner city and eventually became a school superintendent. Along the way, I got my MBA at the University of Notre Dame. And for the last 8 years or so, I've been helping school superintendents, presidents, CEOs of large organizations create high performing, exceptional teams and cultures.
Excellent. Well, you mentioned to me that that when it comes to we've all heard that culture is important. We've talked about culture on this show, but you mentioned that people don't really they feel like they're analytical. They feel like they are tuned in, but oftentimes aren't actually conscious about what's going on. Um, can you share a little bit about that with our audience? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, there's a professor at the University of Virginia who talks about this idea that we humans can process 11 or 12 million pieces of information in any given moment, which if you really slow down to think about that is fascinating. That we are doing so many things, our bodies are so amazing that we can be processing all these things, pumping blood, our brain circuitry is firing. We can be driving a car while talking on the phone, while chewing gum. And most of those things we don't think about. And he goes on to say that of those 11 or 12 million pieces of information, we're conscious of around 40. So if you think about that, that's pretty fascinating, right? That we're not nearly as conscious as we think we might be. And thankfully that's the case, because if we had to consciously think about the act of getting
Mm.
dressed or of driving a car, and repeat that every day, we'd be exhausted by 8 or 9 a.m. So it's a huge, huge gift. And so this isn't a bad thing, but we
Mm.
also do many things, especially in team dynamics, that we're not conscious of doing. And as a leader, especially as the CEO, oftentimes the frustrations that the CEO is having with the team or with the culture are usually coming out from themselves and they just don't see it.
Absolutely. Well, I often think about how, kind of in the reverse of it, and maybe you can even use some of the same techniques. You think about spies and what they do notice, right? They seem to have hyper notice, but again, you still can't notice everything because, or you can't mentally process all that information because it's way too many things happening at once. But they've tuned, I guess, their observation and their perception and analysis into specific things that are going to help um, whatever it is their mission is, I guess you could say. Is that kind of how what leaders should be doing? Are there certain things they should be more in tune with then to help their culture and help how employees respond to them?
Yeah, I think it's more a matter of just slowing down and thinking about
Mm,
what is the culture that we have, and sort of putting a look in the mirror, an honest look in the mirror, and then saying what's the culture that we strive for. And too often, by the way, a lot of this culture work, it's really summarized in sort of what are the benefits we offer, what are the we offer, we can bring your dog to work, or there's ping pong tables, or there's free dry cleaning, or there's free food for lunch. And most of that stuff isn't really at the heart of good culture work. Most of the good culture work is at the heart of human behavior. And what are we doing? How are we showing up? And it really gets to those unconscious behaviors. So the first step is just slowing down to think about what do we want? And then saying,
mm,
okay, how are we going to get there? And we just released our book this past week called The Great Engagement, and it's really a play off the Great Resignation. That the reality is most organizations are still really struggling in this area. Gallup did a poll not too long ago, and it found that 2/3 of employees are disengaged. Two
Mm.
thirds are disengaged, and of those, about 74% are actively looking for another job. Now, that's pretty mind-boggling. And you extrapolate that, the American Psychology Association started to do some study on the stress related to this disengagement, and they found
Mhm.
that about 550 million days off a year are taken due to the stress at a cost to the US economy alone of $500 billion. And that's just
Mhm.
the US economy. Don't, think about this in a global terms, and it'd be trillions of dollars. So this is a significant challenge, but we don't look at it that way. We don't think about it that way. And there's lots of tools, there's lots of techniques, there's lots of approaches that we can talk about that might be helpful for the audience. But first step is just to slow down and to think about, what do we want and what are we going for as a team and as a culture? And am I, as the leader, as the CEO or as the president, willing to do the work? Because it's not easy either.
And what do you, I mean, because, the saying, what do you want? That's kind of a broad topic. So how are you narrowing in on trying to figure out what's right for your company when it comes to culture? I mean,
Yeah,
because we'd all say, "Oh, yeah, I want a great culture," but I mean, I assume you mean you need a lot more definition than that.
yes, you definitely do. And it really boils down to, what are the frustrations? What are the challenges that you're facing as a team, as a culture? And so I'll give you a few examples. One of the CEOs we worked with not too long ago was really frustrated that everyone was coming to him for answers to problems,
Mm,
and was like, why don't you guys go and solve this stuff without me?
mm,
And it didn't take long to discover that, guess what? When people would bring him a problem, what would he do? He
solve
would
it.
solve 95% of them. And he had literally trained his team unconsciously, not intentionally, but he had
Mm,
trained his team to rely on him. And so, in that regard, it was really this unconscious switch that he flipped. And all of a sudden, he was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was doing that. Or
mm,
another example of a CEO who was really frustrated that she wasn't getting results, that the team, in her case, was a few thousand across multiple locations. They weren't producing the quantifiable results, in their case, the financial results that they were looking for, and
mm.
that people weren't doing what they said they would do. And again, not surprisingly, once we kind of spent some time with them, we peeled back the onion a little bit and helped her to realize that she was making commitments and then not delivering on them. And it could be really simple things like showing up to a meeting 5 minutes late. And it was like this huge epiphany for her of realizing, oh my gosh, I'm not doing what I say I'm going to do. And I think that's okay because I'm the CEO, I'm busy, all the yada, yada, yada that CEOs can think. But the reality is, people are following your lead. And so in her case, it became really quite simple. She said, I'm gonna let my yes be yes and my no be no. I'm not going to say yes to everything, but when I do say yes, I'm going to fulfill on that 100% of the time. And just like magic, within a few months, they were producing significantly better financial returns.
So I mean, how did they get to that conclusion? Or, how did she even get to that conclusion that that was the problem? Because, like you said, there was already a lack of awareness. So how did she suddenly become aware?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So um, the short answer is we have what we call a transformational leadership experience that we take teams through, and it's
Mm,
a roughly 5 month, rather intense and journey, frankly. And it's through that, usually within the first month and a half, that a lot of these insights get created, because we have our own proprietary coaching tool called the Elevate system. We have several surveys that we use: a conscious leader survey, a conscious culture survey, and we really start to unpack and to dive into those things. And that's what produces the conversations. And the
mhm.
conversations are what then produce the insights. So that's a short answer. But the longer answer is, it takes many, many days and many, many hours of really diving deep into it. And you could do it on your own. In fact, our book, that I mentioned before, is sort of a self-paced guide to it, but
Mm.
it's not as easy when you're trying to facilitate it by yourself. It does help significantly, whether it's us or somebody else, to have an outside person that can help kind of walk you through those conversations.
Mm. What do you think the biggest barriers are then for people to see it? Whether they're, I mean, obviously, if you're doing it on your own with the book, it is kind of hard to ask yourself maybe the right questions or probe deep enough. But whether you're doing it yourself or you're having someone else, what are the barriers to awareness?
What are the barriers to awareness? Well, we've got
Mm.
uh, at the beginning, it's sort of a desire to do it. That's why I said the first step is to
Mm.
slow down and realize, am I really committed to this? And when I
Yeah.
say it's the leader. We only do work with organizations where the CEO hires us directly. We don't come in otherwise, because it tends not to work, because the CEO is the tip of the spear, if you will. They are the font of their culture. And so if we're going to go about making it work, then we want to make sure that it's set up for success. And we actually promise results. We actually guarantee the results with the clients that we engage with. So we don't want to waste our time. We don't want to waste their time. So we make sure that, the folks we work with are 100% committed to doing the work. And then when we get into it, I mentioned this conscious culture survey as an example. We
Mm-hmm.
have 12 cultural mindsets that we've unpacked over the last 30 years of doing this work, that are really at the heart of what it takes. What are the unconscious mindsets and motivations that at the very root cause level are causing some challenges? So another example I'll give you is, we work with a lot of schools across the country, and oftentimes schools are amazingly loving, very stability minded. They provide great comfort and stability for the kids, obviously, which is fantastic, which is a huge strength. And sometimes that need for stability can cause an avoidance of issues. We
Mm.
avoid tough stuff. We avoid talking about the real challenges. Well, you can imagine that if you're avoiding things, that it causes all sorts of downstream issues. And most times we're dealing with those downstream issues. We're dealing with like the symptoms. We don't get to the root cause. But when a team
Mm-hmm.
can realize, oh my gosh, we're avoiding things, it's like, boom, there's that conscious light switch again. And the team gets into action, and they become much more willing to have the quote unquote tough conversations. And all of a sudden you can start to see tremendous fruit coming from that.
So, what are some of the other mindsets that you guys have discovered?
Well, some of them aren't necessarily our discoveries, by the way. So, for instance, one that's pretty common out there is assuming positive intent or assuming nefarious intent.
Mm.
Quite common. Drama is another interesting one. Drama and gossip. Um, there's a
Mm.
there's there's a great drama researcher called Cy Wakeman out there, and she really talks about this at length. Um, but that's a really interesting one, versus sort of radical ownership, where I'm not going to talk about you. I'm not going to talk about the problem. I'm going to go get in action and work to work through that problem and solve it
Mm.
with you, or um, come together as a team. Which is
Mm-hmm.
another important element of this, by the way, is the team dynamic. That um, not that one-on-one coaching, executive coaching can't be helpful, but it tends not to produce the results that most CEOs are looking for. It's why many people are frustrated
Mm.
with bringing in a consultant or bringing in a coach, and months later or years later, it's hard to really point to the results. So part of our process, part of our belief is that you really have to engage the entire team, and you have to start at the top. So you have to start with the CEO and the executive team, whatever that may look like. It could be 4 or 5 people, it could be 7 or 8 people, but that team really needs to go to work together, because here's the beauty is that if we're going to become more conscious, then we need help. It's darn near impossible to become conscious of all of our unconscious motivations, or as some folks talk about it, the unconscious biases that we have. There's an interesting unconscious bias codex out there that lists all these things, and there's several hundred of them. Well, good luck becoming conscious of all those. I know I can't. I've tried. I've gotten better in some areas, but it's really hard. But with a team around me, with my fellow partners and the folks that I work with, my wife, they can help me realize, oh, Tom, you're doing that thing again. Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm
Mm.
sorry. Or good catch, and I can help catch it. So the team supports each other in becoming more conscious, not in a annoying sort of, hey, you're doing that thing again, see, but in a helpful way, in a supportive way, because we're all committed to growing and improving together.
He when you're yeah, when you were just saying all that, my thought was, man, that sounds exhausting. And so I'm curious, and what I was reflecting on is, I've worked with some organizations that were very growth focused, right? And so it was always about what could you be doing better, which is really important. But there did kind of become this time where it's like, oh my goodness, I don't need any more feedback. Do you see that? And if so, how do you kind of combat that?
Yeah, the answer is actually quite simple because I
Mm,
totally agree with you. In fact, about 2 or 3 years of doing this work, I'm about 8 or 9 years into it now. I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm exhausted. This is too much work. It's like I'm done growing. I'm all set. Um,
mm.
but that's obviously not a great answer, right?
No,
Is what fun is
absolutely
what
not.
fun is life if you're just like, okay, I'm done growing. So
Right.
we found the answer is actually quite simple. That
Mm,
so there's three tools to shape culture, and they're not uncommon words. They're leadership, they're management, and there's coaching. They're three very,
mm,
very different tools. People think about them, they're quite similar, but they're not. They're three very different tools. But when the world of coaching is only coaching if it's asked for.
mm,
And that right there is the most often missing element is that we coach people, we give people feedback, and they don't want it. Well,
mm,
think about how unbelievably disrespectful that is, and how pandering, and how sort of it makes people feel like little kids, right? Um, these are adults. We're an adult professional environment. You should not be providing feedback to somebody who doesn't want it.
mm.
You don't get to blame them for that either, by the way. There's lots of ways to get them to want the feedback. We can talk about that if you want. But
Yeah.
it starts right there. If somebody doesn't want it, then stop. Stop, stop, stop. Don't
Mm,
give it to them. They may not be having a good day, a good morning. In which case, if you give it to them, you just like put a huge crack in your relationship with them, and you're not doing an effective job of leading them, of being their boss or whatever. So if people are going to say yes to being open to the coaching, then they have to be able to say no, because you can't say
mm.
yes with integrity if you can't say no.
Oh no, and that's really interesting. As a leader myself, there's things that I see or whatever that, to your point, that uh, maybe people aren't wanting the feedback. So back to what you were saying before, how do you encourage growth and growth mindset with your employees so that they actually not want constant feedback, but do want feedback and they do want to improve? And how do you instill that in them, or get them to see that?
Well, it depends on the situation, obviously, and so
Mm,
that's what we help people as we coach them through the specifics of what they're wrestling with. But I'll try to give
mm,
you a few sort of more general examples that might be helpful. So one is in the hiring process, hiring people who have that sort of interest in growing and learning, because not
mm.
all candidates are equal there, right? So
Yep.
making sure that your hiring process is locked into what you're looking for as a team, as a culture, is really important. From there, then it becomes a part of just what is our cultural DNA? How do we do things around here? And if every day people are just kind of bouncing ideas off each other and throwing ideas and not getting defensive and saying, that's an interesting idea. And then you start to see it's just a part of what we do. It's not a big deal. Because by the way, just because I give you coaching doesn't mean you're going to do anything with it. It's still your call. You're still an adult.
Hmm.
You're still a professional. You have to decide what works for you and what doesn't. So we also have to let go of like our ego around, well, I gave you a great idea and you didn't do it. Well, maybe it didn't fit. Maybe it wasn't a good fit for that particular situation. On the other end of the extreme, where somebody who is just almost combative to it or not open to it, giving them the book Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck is a good start, and see if they'll read that at least, because that book tends to open people's brains up a little bit. But it could be just a really frank conversation. Don't avoid it, for instance. So if you've been trying for weeks or for months to get the person to open up and they just keep saying no, 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 okay, well, then now it's a different conversation. It's, hey, look, I think you're great. I really think you've got a lot to offer to this team. But I want to be clear about something, that you're failing when it comes to X, Y, and Z. And I don't want to see you fail anymore. And I've got some ideas for you, but I'm not going to give them to you unless you really want them.
Mm.
And then just be quiet and see what they say. Now, if they say, yeah, sure, then still don't give it to them, because that's not a yes.
Right.
Wait, and say, well, it doesn't sound like you really are open to it, which is fine. I'll come back. We can come back to this maybe next week. And
Mm.
sometimes that'll pop them. No, no, no. Okay, seriously, am open to it. Okay, now you've got that. Now you actually have the door open, and now they actually are listening. But don't give it to them until you can feel a genuine yes sort of emanating from them.
Mm. Okay, well, let's we talked about the problem, and we talked about awareness. How do we what are some of the action plans to make a change then? Like, what are some of the tools people put in place to drive culture? Like, I get you have to know where you're headed, but I assume that some of the techniques to get you there might be repeatable among different organizations.
Yeah, yeah. Give you another example. This is a phenomenally brilliant team of engineers who are working on autonomous vehicles. And they were having some challenges, frankly, with discussions and with dialogue, because they're all brilliant people. They were kind of talking past each other or around each other. And so we had to slow them down. Again, we do a few day sort of offsite, pretty intense retreat. And the conversation shifted to that future. What are you guys going for? What is it that you're here to do? What's the purpose fundamentally of your life, not the organizations, but of your life? And so helping people to get clear about why do they do what they do? What do they want to use their one precious life for? And then
Mm.
when we can get clear about that, which isn't easy, by the way, it can take some time, then we can map that onto, okay, then what's the purpose of the organization? How does my personal purpose in life fit with the purpose of this organization? And what they came to realize is that really this wasn't about like a cool technology. This was about providing access to transportation services that folks maybe who were in the inner city of certain cities didn't have access to. So they didn't have a way to get to the doctor. And they told stories of people who would literally call 911 just to get an ambulance to show up so they get a free ride to the hospital. How do we short circuit that? How do we provide a way for people to get access to transportation? And that way we reduce the overall sort of global gas house emissions. We have fewer cars on the road. We have more efficient cars, more efficient transportation options. Maybe we can take back some of our concrete and our driveways and our streets and turn those into green spaces. Just a phenomenal vision for the future. And the reality is we're still probably many years, if not decades away from that. But when they started to get clear about that was their future, that was their shared purpose, all of the daily sort of nitpicky sort of silliness, frankly, the debates and the disagreements started to dissipate because they were more committed to that shared future together than they were
Mm.
about being right about some little nitpicky agenda item.
Well, that sounds really noble. And so, how about those of us how do we find shared purpose for those organizations that, maybe I work for Target and it's like, um, like you're selling stuff and yeah, people need stuff, but how do I find, something that's going to align my team to their personal purpose and the company's purpose?
Well, like I said, we've been doing this. My business partner's been doing this for 33 years now, and he's worked in
Mm,
every industry you can think of, from Kenai, Alaska to Germany, all over the United States, obviously, and from engineering firms to, I just mentioned, autonomous vehicles, to healthcare, to schools, to nonprofits. And frankly, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that human beings are almost universally motivated by making a difference and being
mm,
helpful. And so
mm-hmm,
again, to make that more pragmatic, we were working with an engineering team, and the one engineer was very much driven by his faith, by his faith in God. And
mm-hmm,
he was feeling a little bit burned out at work. And all of a sudden he realized, like, oh my gosh, my life purpose isn't just to live that way on Sundays, but I
mm,
could actually do this on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, with that really difficult employee, or with that pain in the butt vendor, or that really difficult city commissioner. I could actually go and take some of the things that matter to me, and being kind and being generous and being helpful, and I could go apply that in the work context, even
mm-hmm,
though, they're building airports and buildings and freeways. You wouldn't think, like, well, what's the overarching purpose there? Well, it gets down to the micro level of, what does that person care about, and how do they live their purpose in those daily interactions, which again
mm,
is tremendously inspiring. It's tremendously pragmatic too, by the way, where this isn't like airy fairy stuff. This actually works. These produce very tangible results. We've got 33 years of data to prove it, but it also is a life changer. It also is a way to wake up much more energized, much more excited about what we do. And now, does it work every single day? No. There are days I'm very excited about my work. I love what I do. I get to travel over the country, but I also have a wife and 3 kids. And there are days when I do not want to get on an airplane and go somewhere.
mm-hmm,
And so I have to remind myself, what am I doing? Oh, I get to go to help the school in Southern California. And it's a quick reminder of, like, oh yeah, this is awesome. I do get to do this. And almost always, not always, but 95% of the time, it's like I can switch my consciousness switch on and be like, okay, let's go. I'm excited now.
mm. Okay. No, that's good. Um, and so, sorry, you were talking about, like, so we know what we want from a culture perspective. We've built a shared purpose, and people are on board. Um, how do you start moving the needle?
Yeah, well, it gets back to that application of leadership management and coaching. And it's kind of like a Venn diagram for any of those fellow nerds out there. If you think about the overlapping circles of leadership management and coaching. And fundamentally, we have to lead first. We have to figure out, like, why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? And it could be really, really big picture, like we want to change global gas house emissions. Or it could be really small, like, we got a 30-minute meeting. Why are we here? What's the purpose of this meeting? And Simon Sinek talks a lot about this. It's all really good stuff. That's really what we're talking about. Is in our book, leadership is generating a view of the future that others take on as their future. Not because
Mm,
they bought it, not because I sold it to them, not because there's buy-in, but because they genuinely care about that same future. And so that's the often missing element, is we don't slow down to get people aspiring to something. And again, we talk about this in the book, but there's a simple formula that we came up with for engagement, and it's engagement equals aspiration times empowerment. That if we want
mm,
people to be engaged in their work, if we want to undo this sort of huge disengagement and people wanting to quit, then we've got to figure out, what do they aspire to? Not what do I as the boss, or not what do we as a company, but what does that individual employee care about? What do they aspire to?
right, right.
And when we can unpack that, it's tremendously powerful. Now, we can't just do that. We've got to also empower them. We've got to give them the
Mm,
tools. We've got to put trust in them to go out and do good work. Because if they're not empowered, then they're just spinning their wheels and they get frustrated. So those two elements are really critical. And then from
mm,
there, we need to make sure that we manage. Management is not a bad thing. Too often we'll see articles out there that say, management's dead and it's all about coaching. Well, not really. You need all of these. So management is actually quite simple. We would contend that you can't manage people. You can only manage agreements or promises that people make. When somebody agrees to do something, okay, now you've got something to work with. Now you've got a promise. But too often we just tell people what to do and we don't actually check in with them to see if they can do it. And then we get
Mm.
frustrated when they don't do what they didn't agree to do in the first place. And so it creates this vicious cycle, and people get burned out, and people feel like cogs in a wheel. They feel like they're just a widget because we're not slowing down to get clear agreements between us. And then the third element of that obviously is coaching. And we talked a little bit about coaching is only coaching if it's asked for. But the other part of coaching that's important is that it's really everything else. It's whatever that person needs to be successful. They're clear about the future. They're clear about what they aspire to. They've got the plan. They've got the management elements of it. They've made promises to do things. And now it's like, okay, well, how the heck do I do all that stuff? I've never done this before. And so coaching is everything else. It's reading a book, it's attending a conference, it's having a conversations, it's asking good questions. Coaching is what supports people from moving from where they are towards that future goal.
Yeah, I always looked at, I guess I have a couple of thoughts, but I've always looked at leadership and management as kind of like a spectrum. And every leader role has some level of management needed and some level of leadership needed. And depending on what your role is, one might need more than the other. Like if it's a when I did work at Target, and as a leader there, there was a lot of managing. When I mean managing, I mean like, doing schedules and making sure transactions are going and, procedures are being adhered to. But then the leadership is all the things about helping people grow, helping them solve problems, things like that. And so, that had more management in that role versus, role today as the president of a company. I find there's a lot more leadership involved because there's a lot more about empowering everybody to, be the best they can be. And so that's kind of how I've always looked at management and leadership, that every role needs both of them. It's just which one's more prominent at any given time. I don't know if
Yeah.
you have thoughts about that.
No, I think that's really good. I think what you're speaking to is that, if you're a master craftsman, right? A woodworker, you would never pull out a hammer to cut a piece of wood.
Mm,
And yet we do that as leaders all the time. We pull out, let's say, a management tool when leadership is needed. And then we
mm,
wonder why it doesn't work. Um, it's like, and it's no wonder, because we often get promoted to positions of leadership based on our ability to get stuff done.
right, right.
Right. But then we don't equip people with the new set of skills they need, which is leading other people. And the
Mm,
fundamental job of leadership is to grow your people. It's no longer to be the problem solver. It's no longer to be the chief problem solver and the person getting everything done. Now, everyone needs to get stuff done. I don't mean to minimize that, but it's a much smaller part of your job. Can I draw
mm.
just a visual here? Would that be helpful?
Sure.
All right. Um, so back to the sort of the idea of leadership, right? Management and coaching. So leadership should be a huge part of anyone's job, especially if you're the CEO. And then coaching is also these are not my best circles. Coaching is also a huge part of the job. But the reality is management actually can be quite a small portion of your job if you do it effectively, because it's really a matter of what promises did you make, and then let's check in to see how we did. You either did it or you didn't. Doesn't make you a bad person if you didn't, but what help do you need going forward? How do we improve that going forward? So you can start to
Mm,
see how these three pieces fit together. And when you do this well, when you're firing in all cylinders, like Mikolai Csikszentmihalyi's, if you're in flow, then that
mm,
middle overlap there is results. You're getting results. Now, there's one other sort of element here that I didn't talk about yet, and it looks more like a pile. It's the stuff pile. And the reality is some things that we do don't fit into leadership, management, or coaching. They're more like
mm.
chores. They're more like I have to do expense reports, right?
Right.
I don't want to. I don't enjoy doing them, but they have to get done. It's a chore.
Mm,
most oftentimes we love getting chores done because we can check it off our list.
right.
Problem is, it's not our job. Our fundamental job is
Mm,
to lead, manage, and coach to grow our people, because the only way you grow a culture and grow a team is by growing the people in it. And
mm,
so we do it almost bass backwards. We wake up in the morning, we check our email, and we start doing tasks based on somebody else's agenda, right? Different than waking up saying, okay, what do I need to do to grow my people? Oh, I need to lead,
mm,
I need to manage, I need to coach. And then when there's time left over after that, then I'll get to my chores, then I'll get to my task list.
mm. Yeah. So to back up, I guess just for the people who are on who are just listening to the podcast, your leadership coaching and management is a Venn diagram with the management piece being a smaller circle than the rest. So obviously we have to operate where all of those cross, but how much you're doing each of those, I guess, and how much impact each of those has is not even. Would
Yeah,
you say that?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's exactly. It's again, it's getting back to that consciousness thing. How am
Mm,
I going to consciously spend my time today, tomorrow, and
yeah.
this week to produce these
Yeah.
results? We were just talking
And,
to a, go ahead.
oh no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, we were just talking to a school superintendent, and he said he's been doing this for 25 years. And he said, Tom, this is the first time this all clicked for me. And it's
Mm,
amazing, just this simple consciousness for me, the impact it's had. We've had a
mm,
106% increase in our English language art scores and a 70% increase in our math scores. And we've been stagnant for like years, Tom,
mm,
just because their discipline issues have gone down by 20%. Their attendance at school has gone up. And it's not rocket science, but it's because they got to the fundamental root cause issues in their culture. It wasn't another task to do. It wasn't another curriculum. It wasn't another like system management system or project management system. Not that those things are bad, but it wasn't anything tactical like that. It was a fundamental shift in his mindset and his executive team's mindset that produced those
mm,
results.
hmm. And can you say kind of what the shift was? Because I mean that's pretty phenomenal. A lot of schools uh, have those issues.
Well, I don't want to speak for him. We have a case study on our
Mm,
website. If people are interested in,
mm,
in checking it out, they can come and check it out. I'll put a link to it. We're going to put together a landing page for this. Phoenix like the city, perform.com/corporate CPR. And I'll put a
mm,
link to that case study. I'll also put a link to a couple other resources that might be helpful. One of which is what we call the Engage Life Wheel or Engage Life Inventory. And it's a simple 2-page PDF that, if you do nothing else, do this for yourself, because it's a great place to start. It's a great place to become more conscious about your own life and where are you engaged in your life and where are you disengaged? Where have you sort of given up maybe in certain areas of your life? Where have you been resigned about certain areas of your life? And so this engaged life inventory is a great place to kind of look in the mirror by yourself. You don't have
mm,
to share with anybody to create a more engaged life. Because if you can do that for yourself, then you can start to bring that same mindset back into your team, whether it's a team of 3 people or a team of 3,000.
excellent. Well, I think that kind of brings us to the end of our time. What three things do you want to leave top of mind with folks?
Yeah, good question. Good question. So, one is for those CEOs, superintendents out there who are looking for a different sort of group. Maybe they've already in a few different groups. I was when I was a CEO, but are looking for something different. We've got a group called the Interchange that might be interesting to you. It's a wonderful, wonderful group of humble leaders from across the country who get together about once a month. So if you're interested in checking that out, let us know. Um, what else? I think obviously we'd love to have more people share our book. We didn't write it to make money. In fact, we probably will never make money on the book. It's quite an expensive and time-consuming endeavor. We wrote it to help more people out there because I was a 34-year-old CEO who was excited to do the job, but frankly didn't know what the heck I was doing. And I would have loved to have a pragmatic book. So whether you're a CEO of a large team or the CEO of your own life, I obviously unbiased recommend picking that book up. And then the other is just, start asking people around you to help you become more conscious. Start asking
Mm,
people, how could I get better in life? How could I improve as a husband or as a father or as a fellow teammate? Just that simple inquiry can be really powerful in helping you to become more engaged and more effective in what you do.
mm. Um, yeah, well, thank you for those suggestions. And then I know you mentioned the landing page already, but was there any other ways you wanted folks to know how to get in contact with you or learn more about what you do?
Yeah, the same place, phoenixperform.com is sort of our main landing page. If you want to jump straight to the book is engagementbook.com, thegreatengagementbook.com. But again, all this will be on phoenixperform.com/corporate CPR. That way you can all go to one spot and get to the other resources that hopefully are helpful to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.